The people running this country have never been elected. They've never been interviewed. They've never appeared on a ballot. And after today, you'll know their names.
What did one of the UK's most high-profile political strategists just say?
The cabinet is just a kind of stage theatre, and actually officials in the cabinet office have already decided it all.
I'm Bev Turner, and I hope you're sitting comfortably, because I think Dominic Cummings, the man who was chief advisor to Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, during 2019 to 2020, has just revealed that the deep state is running this country, and that our political system is therefore a complete sham. I think that's what he just said.
The person in the... So if you think of two roles, right? Foreign Secretary in Great Britain and the private secretary in the PM's office responsible for foreign affairs, an official whose name has never been in the newspapers. That person was like 10 times more powerful and important than the Secretary of State was. And I think this is something which people just don't really realize. And it's part of like how the whole system has become fake. So you have fake meritocracy, fake responsibility, and then fake cabinet government. So they all walk up Downing Street, the cameras whir, they pose, they smile, ha ha, I'm going into the most powerful meeting, aren't I great? But it's all nonsense. The cabinet is just a kind of stage theatre, and actually officials in the cabinet office have already decided it all. When you sit in Whitehall now, right, in meetings, they are literally scripted. So when the Prime Minister has a meeting with ministers, what happens is that before the Prime Minister has that meeting, officials go into the Prime Minister's study and they give him a folder. And in the folder at the front is a thing called Chairman's Notes. And that's the script, and that's what the Prime Minister reads out. And the conclusions of the meeting are in the Chairman's Notes, drafted before the meeting happens, right? So the Prime Minister says, hello, Secretary of State, blah, 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 and then all these officials sit around the sides on chairs around the edge of the room. And then the MP, the Secretary of State, will look down at their folders because they've all got their scripts, right? And this is why I use the NPC meme, right? Because then the Prime Minister reads out, well, we're here to discuss blah, blah, and then he goes around the room, and then Secretary of State for Justice or the Foreign Secretary reads out his bullet points, and then he reads out their bullet points, and they read out. If anyone goes on a script, you see the officials sort of go, and then look over at the other official on the side of the room and kind of go, that means we'll come back to that after the meeting and make sure that that doesn't happen. And then at the end, for a fascinating, great discussion, thank you so much for your wonderful, insightful, original contributions. And then he reads out the conclusions which are all drafted in advance. And it sounds like a parody.
I want you to understand what you just watched. Not a conspiracy theorist, not a man on the internet with a theory. That was the chief advisor to the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom telling you on the record that the most powerful meetings in British politics are theatre. The conclusions are pre-written. The Prime Minister reads from a script. The ministers read their ballot points, and if anyone goes off script, the officials, the unelected officials sitting around the edges of the room, make sure it never happens again. He said the private secretary, a person whose name has never appeared in any newspaper, was 10 times more powerful than the Foreign Secretary of the United Kingdom. Tap community, tapped in. Welcome back.
Tap in. Tap in. Yeah, we breaking the code. Truth on the mic, let the fire explode. Faith in the facts, yeah, we carry the load. This the Tap Podcast, let the whole world know. Let them know.
If you're new here, stay with me. Some of you will tap out when we get to the deeper layers because maybe you're not ready for it. That's fine. This is not for everyone. But if you stay for the full tap, you will leave this episode understanding how this country actually works at all levels that most members of parliament don't even understand. So let's go. Let me start where most commentators never start, with the structure. Because if you do not understand the structure, you will be twisted by every headline and every election result for the rest of your life. In the United Kingdom, there is an institution called the Bank of England. Most people think of it the way they think of a government department. It's not. The Bank of England was founded in 1694 as a private institution. A private banker named William Paterson proposed a perpetual loan to the King of England to fund war against France. The loan was £1.2 million. It was never designed to be repaid. It carried perpetual interest, and in exchange, the private banks received a monopoly on creating the British pound. That was 332 years ago, and the structure has never been dismantled. It has only grown. Today, the Bank of England is governed by something called the Court of Directors. Let me give you names you have never heard of. The chair is David Roberts. Before he chaired the Central Bank of the United Kingdom, he spent 24 years at Barclays, where he became a main board executive director. He then chaired Nationwide Building Society. He was vice president of NHS in England. He was appointed to the Bank of England by the Crown on the recommendation of the Chancellor. Not elected, not interviewed by Parliament, recommended and then installed. Sitting alongside him, Lord Justice Dahi, a member of the House of Lords who also sits on the court, Dame Anne Glover, a venture capitalist who co-funded Amadeus Capital Partners, Francis O'Grady, former General Secretary of the TUC and a Labour peer, Sir Ron Khalifa, chairman of the Network of International Payment Company. These are the people who govern your money. I've created a special tool for you called STEWARD. Steward, because all financial management begins with stewardship, and many of you have been asking me how I develop my finances. It all started with management, that ugly, unsexy word called management. And so we developed a tool to make it easier for you. It's called Steward. You check the links beneath in this video, amongst other products that we're going to be bringing out to you. Many want tap merch and different things like that. It is coming. Please also don't forget, look at the excitement, my fan club in the back. Don't forget to hit the like button. If you're enjoying this, hit subscribe, but also comment beneath your biggest takeaways, what you love, what you hate about the show. I want to see everything. I do respond to as many of you as I can. And if you're a new subscriber, respond, new sub, I want to comment. I want to welcome you personally to the TAP team. God bless you and enjoy the rest of the video. These are the people who govern your money. They set the strategy for the institutions that control your interest rates, your mortgage payments, your savings, and the value of the pound in your pocket. You have never voted for them at any time. Now, this is important. The Bank of England, on their own website, published a paper this year, 2026, about its Court of Directors. And it contains a quote from the 1800s that I want you to hear. It says, the board of directors is in fact self-electing. They are nearly always elected when a vacancy occurs by death or resignation. The whole board chooses the new member. Self-electing since the 1800s. The most powerful financial institution in the country selects its own board. And that board is populated by the people who come from the banks it is supposed to regulate. That is not a democracy, that is a club. But the Bank of England is only one piece. Liz Truss, who sat in the Prime Minister's chair and lasted 49 days, described the full system.
The Climate Change Act, the Constitutional Reform Act 2005. I mean, this is a very important part of why Britain doesn't work. We used to have a Lord Chancellor who was appointed by the Prime Minister, who appointed senior judges. That role was effectively abolished by Tony Blair, or denuded of its power back in 2005. Instead, the appointment of judges is now down to a quango. So effectively, you've created a self-appointing judiciary rather than one that feeds into parliamentary sovereignty. And a Supreme Court was created in Britain, which had never existed before, rather than having the senior judiciary in the House of Lords. And I think that has created a problem. And we've seen more activist judges, more activist lawyers. We've seen government policy like Rwanda challenged now by the Supreme Court. So that is another act of Parliament that I think we need to reverse. I mean, I could go on for a very long time, but I think you go right back to the 1947 Town and Country Planning Act, which is Why is it so difficult to build things in Britain? It's because we had a group of socialists in government in post-war, who put in this socialist piece of legislation that nobody has since reversed. But this is the type of discussion we need to be having in Britain. And one of my many frustrations with politics is that so much of politics is focused on the absolute superficial stuff. Like, who's going to be the next leader of the Conservative Party, or why is X unpopular, what has X done wrong this week, rather than, what are the fundamental things that are stopping people in Britain pursuing happy and successful lives? That's what we should be focused on.
She just listed them: the Bank of England, the Office for Budget Responsibility, the Environment Agencies, the Climate Change Committee, a self-appointed judiciary created by Tony Blair's Constitutional Reform Act. She called it a straitjacket, and she said even at the top, there is no more freedom of maneuver. Actually, there is less. When she tried to cut a corporation tax, the OBR leaked a £70 billion forecast she said turned out to be wrong. The Bank of England announced it would begin selling gilts the day before her budget. The markets panicked, and she was removed. A prime minister removed in 49 days, not by voters, but by institutions. Now let me show you the layer underneath that almost no Western analyst is covering right now. And this is where it gets genuinely disturbing. The current Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, is a confirmed member of the Trilateral Commission. This is on Wikipedia. He tweeted about attending a Trilateral Commission meeting on the 4th of November 2017. The Trilateral Commission was founded in 1973 by David Rockefeller, Holly Sklar, who wrote a book called Trilateralism, described it as an organization that represents the interest of multinational corporations and banks. In January 2023, Starmer attended the World Economic Forum in Davos. This is confirmed by Parliamentary Register of Members, Financial Interests. Google Island paid for his meals. He spoke on a panel called Repowering the World. The video is on YouTube. And when Emily Maitalis asked him on camera to choose between Davos and Westminster, he said Davos. His exact words: Westminster is just a tribal shouting place. Let that settle. The Prime Minister of Britain prefers Davos to Parliament. We've already said this. Now follow the thread, because this is where the money trail becomes a thriller. Starmer appointed Peter Mandelson as Britain's ambassador to the United States in September 2025. Mandelson was dismissed. The Department of Justice had released files showing Mandelson sought Jeffrey Epstein's consultation on his business affairs after Epstein had already pleaded guilty to child sex offenses in 2008. After his dismissal, Mandelson's consulting firm, Global Counsel, which he co-founded, registered on the UK Foreign Influence Registration Scheme as a lobbyist for the government of Qatar. The contract runs until August 2026. They've been communicating with senior UK government officials on technology and infrastructure policy on behalf of Qatar. Now connect that to money. Qatari investments in the United Kingdom now exceeds £40 billion. That is from the official Qatar-UK joint communique published last year. Qatari-owned businesses generated $127 billion in UK turnover in 2022. They support 600,000 British jobs. 1 in every 40 workers in this country works for a Qatari-owned business. The UAE has committed $10 billion through Mubadala. The Gulf Sovereign Wealth Funds collectively manage $4.9 trillion today. By 2030, according to Deloitte, that is projected to reach $18 trillion. A German research paper published this February studied how these funds operate. The title is Sovereign Wealth Funds and Foreign Policy. The conclusion: Gulf states deploy their funds strategically to expand hard, soft, and sharp power. In 2016, Saudi Arabia threatened to sell government bonds to block American legislation. In 2024, they hinted at selling European bonds to prevent seizure of Russian assets. These are not passive investors. These are sovereign powers using capital as a weapon. And Britain, which privatized its resources, loaded itself with debt, and outsourced its industry, is now being purchased sector by sector by the countries that did the opposite.
A lot of people think that politicians are like in charge. They think that like by changing from the left to the right or Republican to Democrat, it actually makes a difference. What I discovered quite some time back is that when we introduced this system in 1913, the Federal Reserve, its shareholders were the regional central banks, and then the regional central banks were all owned by the private banks. Now, the private banks were able to create the dollar every time they issue a loan, and those private banks, which previously were owned by wealthy European families and, elites, whether it be the Rockefellers or the Morgans or the Warburgs. And by the way, the Warburgs, they were both on the board of the Bank for International Settlement and the Reichsbank, which funded Nazi Germany. And the brother was also on the board of the Federal Reserve. So you had this family that were both part of the communist Soviet Union, the fascist Nazi government, and the Federal Reserve. And they were all in the same families, funding every side of all the Cold War and everything else and profiting from both sides. But if you look at what happened with the Bank for International Settlements, which was set up after World War I to manage the reparation payments from Nazi Germany, it was every time Hitler would invade a new country, it would just take the gold in the Bank for International Settlements, like at Czechoslovakia. As soon as the Nazi Germany would raid, it would just take that gold, which was held at the Federal Reserve and the Bank of England. It didn't hold any of it. It just held the ledger. And it would transfer it over to the Nazi party. And so what you had is that the gold was held at the Federal Reserve, the Russian Central Bank, and the Bank of England. And by the end of World War I and World War II, all of the Nazi Germany gold ended up around Fort Knox. All of the British Empire gold, which was, accumulated through opium wars and various atrocities, that all ended up at Fort Knox. And a massive chunk of the Russian Soviet Union gold all ended up at Fort Knox. So 75% of the world's gold, through this elaborate mechanism at the Bank for International Settlements, it would, every time Nazi Germany raided a new country, it would hand over the gold and just put a new title on top of the gold and change the label on the drawer and say, hey, Fed, that belongs to them, or hey, Bank of England, that belongs to them. And then eventually it all ended up in Fort Knox, and now obviously it's never been audited. And it says that Treasury has it, but actually the Federal Reserve has levered it up and it's on both balance sheets. And the Federal Reserve is a private company. So if you look at Treasury's balance sheet and Federal Reserve balance sheet, you've got this 8,200 tons of gold, which is called into question. And the Trump administration said he would audit, but I don't think he is going to audit.
Dixon said it plainly. There are two types of countries. Countries that privatize everything and took on debt, became the product. Countries that kept their resources and built sovereign wealth became the buyers. We privatized. They saved, and now they own us. And sitting at the center of this is BlackRock, nearly $14 trillion in assets, more than the GDP of every country on earth except America and China. 20,000 board seats across the public companies, a technology platform called Aladdin used by central banks, governments, and pension managers worldwide. Larry Fink of BlackRock CEO has met Keir Starmer at Downing Street multiple times. September 2024, November 2024, with the full BlackRock executive board. May 2025, Starmer posted publicly, "I'm determined to deliver growth by working in partnership with leading businesses like BlackRock." An academic named Daniela Gabor wrote, "Starmer's vision is government by BlackRock. The state takes the risk, BlackRock takes the profit." Now I need to take you somewhere most people have never been, because everything I've shown you, the scripted meetings, the quangocracy, the Gulf money, BlackRock, all of it rests on one mechanism that you were never taught in school.
What is the role of the state and the government? From all my research, the state and the government are a battering ram to take blame for the fact that they are a piggy bank in a Ponzi scheme that needs to reallocate finance to where their lobby wants it to go. Okay. So what does that actually mean? Well, firstly, you start with the monetary conversation, which is how we first met, which is that the pound and fiat currency is fundamentally a Ponzi scheme. What does that mean? That every single pound that is created, it started with a $1.2 million loan between William Patterson and the King of England. And that loan was a perpetual loan that had perpetual interest. And they gave a monopoly on the creation of the pound to the private banks, which the Bank of England was at the time. And so with that structure, which is exported globally around anyone that subscribes to this model, you have a problem. Where is the money to repay the interest if every pound is a debt? And you soon realize that, well, the money to repay the interest doesn't exist. And so you have to find someone else to take on another loan in order to repay the interest on the money that doesn't exist. And so structurally, that is how the pound is created, how the dollar is created. And so you have a number of consequences to that. The first is you treat every consumer as an asset, you try and get them in debt. You treat every corporation as an asset. And those corporations, they can either get access to 0% loans, which is at the highest level of power, the closer you are to a central bank, or you're a small business and you pay you don't get a loan for a start because they'd rather lend it to the consumer for a house that isn't going to run away. Or you pay the highest level of interest, whether it's 30% on a credit card or a payday loan at the consumer level. And so the corporate debt market is really for the highest levels of power, and the small to medium-sized enterprise doesn't really get the loans unless they've got some kind of cash flow type of thing.
Every pound in existence was created as a loan, a debt with interest attached. But the money to pay the interest was never created, so someone else must borrow to generate it. And someone after them, and someone after them. That is a Ponzi scheme, not because someone chose to run a scam, because the mathematics of the system require perpetual expansion of debt. Now here is the K. The people closest to the creation of money, the banks, the asset managers, borrow at near 0%. They use that money to buy everything, property, companies, infrastructure. You borrow at 5% for a mortgage, 10 for a car, 20 on a credit card, 30 on a payday loan. The further you are from the printer, the more your money costs, and the more of your life you spend paying interest to the people who created it from nothing. Dixon called it socialism for corporations with access to the money printer, and capitalism for everyone else. That is why 5 prime ministers in 7 years changed nothing. It does not matter who is in the chair answers to the machine, and the machine answers to the people who control the creation of money. Now, everything I've shown you so far is verifiable. You can check every name, every number, every source, but there is a layer underneath that I believe matters more than all of it. Years ago, the Lord gave me a prophetic word about this nation, that Britain would be sold off. Needed to be an intensity of prayer, especially an awakening to some of the agendas in the EU. And I felt like the Lord says, pray, that you do not become a product. I literally saw people like barcodes being scanned. And I heard Psalm chapter 2, he that sits in heaven laughs at the plans of the enemy because they're not sitting with God. He says, he who sits in heaven laughs. And I want you to sit in heaven, you who are in Europe, to sit in heaven. And I felt like God's war strategy was to laugh at the plans. And God will cause their plans to come to confusion. The foreign powers would purchase what British generations built, that the inheritance of this country will be transferred to those who did not build it. Look at the numbers again. 40 billion from Qatar, 10 billion from the UAE, 18 trillion projected across the Gulf by 2030, 600,000 British jobs in Qatari-owned companies, a former ambassador's firm lobbying for a foreign government while the Prime Minister meets BlackRock at Downing Street's table. The borrower is slave to the lender. That is Proverbs 22 verse 7. It is not a metaphor. It is describing the operating system you just saw explained. And here is the pattern that should stop you. Every empire that has loaded itself with debt and outsourced its sovereignty has eventually been consumed by its own creditors. Babylon fell, Rome fell, the British Empire fell, and now we are watching the American Empire enter this cycle in real time. Dixon said it. The tactics used in Africa, the Middle East, and South America for a century are now being applied at home because they have another plan for the West. And that plan is being executed right now while we argue about which politician will save us. Here's the verdict. What is happening in the United Kingdom right now is simultaneously three things. Number one, it is political theatre. The meetings are scripted. The Prime Minister reads from a folder. The quangocracy runs the domestic machine. 5 leaders in 7 years changes nothing because the chair was never where the power was. Number two, it is a financial operation. Britain has been loaded with debt and is being purchased by sovereign wealth funds that kept their resources while we privatize ours. BlackRock sits at the center. The money flows east, and the middle class is being slowly and deliberately consumed. Number three, it is a spiritual transfer. The inheritance of a nation is being sold to foreign creditors. The borrower has become the slave to the lender, and this was spoken over this nation before any of us saw the receipts. Most people are only seeing one labor. Tap community, you now have all three. There are 7 things, not next week, now. Number one, learn these names and teach them. David Roberts, Lord Jitesh Gadihi, Larry Fink, Peter Mandelson, Global Council, the Trilateral Commission. An informed community is an empowered community. You cannot challenge a system you cannot name. Number two, understand the debt machine and explain it. Every pound is created as a debt. The interest does not exist. The closer you are to the printer, the cheaper your money. The further away you are, the more you pay. That is the K-shaped economy. Draw it for your family on a napkin this week. Number three, review your financial exposure this week. If your savings are in a bank, you are lending your money to the machine at near zero interest, while they lend it back to you at 5 to 10, 20%. Own an asset. Bitcoin in self-custody, gold, silver, something outside the system that cannot be printed or inflated away. Joseph stored grain before the famine. Preparation is not fear, it is faithfulness. Number 4, go local with your money. Every pound spent at a multinational is a vote for the machine. Every pound at your local farmer, your butcher, your independent shop is a vote for your neighbor. Dixon pointed out that Malaysian boycotts of Starbucks forced them to replace their CEO. Your money is your most powerful vote. Number 5, reduce your debt as fast as you can. Every interest payment flows upwards into the structure I just showed you. The less you owe, the freer you are. Dixon left the UK, paid off his mortgage, and now lives debt-free in a country where borrowing is illegal. You may not be able to do that tomorrow, but you can start. Number 6, talk to your family about what you just learned. Not to frighten them, to equip them. Your children are inheriting this system. Give them understanding before the world gives them debt. Number 7, become the most informed person in your circle on this subject. Watch this video back. Please share it. Comment your biggest takeaways. Most people watching this country collapse are doing it through fear or tribal politics. You now have a 3-layer framework: political, financial, and spiritual. Share this episode, not for the numbers, because someone in your world is watching this unfold in utter confusion, and they deserve clarity. Give them the full tab. Here's what most people will miss about what I've shown you today. The system I described has been operating for 332 years, since 1694. It has outlasted every prime minister, every parliament, every protest, and every election. But it has never outlasted a people who understood it and chose to build outside of it. That is what this community is for, not to fight the machine, but to build an ark. You can join the community. Links are beneath this video. This is part 1. There is more to uncover, and we will. Make sure to tap in. The Tab community on Telegram is where we go deeper. Subscribe to the channel. Share this with someone who needs it. Not because I need the views, but because someone in your world deserves more than headlines. Give them the full tap. I'm Tobi Arayomi. You've been tapped. Now go and do likewise.